Today's topic is conversations that change you, right? My grandkids are 7, 6, and 3. And one of the things that my husband gets to do is that he gets to go and he wants my son and my daughter-in-law to have an evening out. So he'll go and he'll say, I'll babysit the grandkids, right? So he went and babysat the grandkids. Well, he came home one day and he's like, I am never babysitting them again. And I was like, what happened? And he was just venting. He was so upset. He said, they didn't listen to me. He said, they got out of their room. They went back and forth out of their rooms and out of their beds. It went on for 2 hours. I couldn't get them to do anything. And then he said, and so I said to the 6-year-old, why don't you listen? Okay. And I said to him, that's actually a very complicated question. Yeah. I said, even adults can't tell you why they don't listen. Okay, we have a lot of fun in our family, okay? So I told my 6-year-old, the next time Papa says, why don't you listen? Tell him it's because of the fall and Adam and Eve. It's because of the sin nature. And so now she's got that answer, right? But then as he was venting, he would say, I feel they don't respect me, okay? And so then I said to him, you know, I've been doing this research on conversations. I said, would you like to hear what I learned? And he said, sure. And I said, I think that sometimes people communicate with information, okay? And so they state facts. I said, when the research shows that your meaning is understood when you communicate with emotions. Isn't that interesting? So I said, so when you say they don't respect me, I said, were you really saying that hurt my feelings? He said, yeah, it hurt my feelings. I felt like I wasn't important to them. So then I said, well, why don't you just tell them that? And then he says, how do you say that? I said, you say, you hurt my feelings. He said, just like that? You just say that? I said, you just say that. You hurt my feelings. I felt like I wasn't important to you. And that hurt me. So he said, okay, I'll try that. And so he said that to my 7-year-old grandson. And he said, I'm sorry, Papa. I didn't know that made you feel that way. Okay, so I just thought, isn't that interesting? Crisis averted. And then he goes, oh, I'd be happy to babysit next week. Right? So I thought in this psychology of conversation, right? What is it that we say and we think when the person who hurt us actually didn't hear our meaning? Okay? And then we walk away wounded, and then we cancel the relationship when the whole thing could have been saved if we just understood how the brain processes words. So that's what we're going to do today. As I told you before, my friend Dr. John Townsend is a neuroscientist, and he said in the neuroscience research, what they find is neuroscience bows down to theology. Okay, what does that mean? It means that in the research, what they find to be the most effective way that will bring us emotional or spiritual health is exactly what the Bible actually says to do. Wow. All right, so what I'm going to show you today is what neuroscience just says about some things, and I'm going to show you the biblical model of what God does. So that God didn't say, I'm saying it this way because your brain's wired this way, okay? But when you look at what Jesus did, it was literally mapped to what the neuroscientist says is the most effective way to get your meaning across. Are you ready for the message? Yes. You excited? Yes. I was excited. I was like, oh, this is fun. Okay, one source for my research came from the book Think Faster, Talk Smarter. And it was written by Matt Abrahams. Okay? And he made these points in his book. He says, we humans are miserable at remembering information. We can barely hold more than 7 distinct numbers in our heads at once. Okay? He said, we're worse when it comes to remembering complex concepts. Our brains are designed to forget. Isn't that interesting? He said, our brains are designed to forget much of what we experience. Forgetting may be the default mode of the brain. We remember the gist of events. So they actually have a term the scientists call fade to gist. You remember the gist of things, but you don't actually remember the specifics. Okay, David Eagleman, he teaches neuroscience at Stanford University. And he says stories are crafted to plug into what matters to the brain, all right? By structuring our communication as a logical sequence with a beginning, a middle, and an end, we prime our messages to be noticed and remembered. Okay, so notice how when I began, I told you, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna share with you what the neuroscientist says, and then I'm gonna give you the biblical model, right? So that is priming you so that your brain now knows, oh, this is the structure. This is where we're going with it, okay? And that's so you can remember. Behavioral scientist Jennifer Akers said, those who tell the best stories will become the best leaders. Okay? Those who tell the best stories will become the best leaders because they activate both the rational and emotional parts of the brain. Okay? So then when I look at how Inspire Women was built, over the 25 years that we've built Inspire Women, literally, the Holy Spirit was the one who guided us on how to build it or what to say, right? What I have found is that a lot of times people like to hide behind numbers, okay? So they throw numbers at people thinking that they will be impressed by the numbers. When in reality, people give to people, backed up by a cause, right? And for them to know you as a person, you know, what has really communicated the message of Inspire Women is the story. From the mother I could not save, God transformed my pain into a passion to help every woman who still has the chance to finish well. This is what I say to people, okay? My mother's final words before she killed herself were, oh God, give my daughter the voice I never had. And though she was not here, God answered her prayers. And he used her daughter not only to find her own voice, but to build an organization that would help thousands of women to find their voice to change our world for Christ. Amen. It's a story, okay? I'm not throwing stats at you. I don't tell you. Inspire Women is, it's a true statement of fact. But I didn't say Inspire Women is the largest funder of scholarships for women going to Bible college and seminary in the state of Texas. I don't ever share that, even though that is a true statement. I share the story, okay? I didn't know till I read this that the brain remembers stories. I didn't do it because of that. I just did it because the Holy Spirit said to do it that way. He said, be vulnerable, share your heart. People will connect with your heart. And because of that, they will connect with whatever you have a passion for, okay? But if you're afraid to share your story because you have to appear so strong in front of everyone, you've actually left behind your strongest asset, which is your story and yourself, okay? In the article, Stories, Statistics, and Memory, Thomas Graeber, he's from Harvard Business School, Christopher Roth is from the University of Chicago, Florian Zimmerman is from Berwick Institute on Behavior, and they said that when you give people statistics, whatever they believe, it will fade by 73%. over the day. Okay? It will fade. 73% of it will be lost. Whereas for the story, 32% will fade. Okay, so the story is what sticks. Imogen Short, she's a professional storyteller, and she says everyone talks about clarity, but clarity without story is forgettable. If you're a founder, the most powerful tool you have isn't your strategy, it's your story. All right? When people say, what is the strategy of Inspire Women? We tell our story. That is literally, we tell our story. We tell the stories of the students. We tell, one of our students asked, how do I raise money? Okay, you tell your story. Okay, you say, why is this ministry important to me? Let me tell you about my story. Let me tell you how God is changing pain into purpose. You tell your story, and then you invite people into your story. Okay, I think that's pretty much what the article is saying. And he says, why is it, she says, that it works? She published an article titled How the Brain Processes Stories. And she says that our brains don't just listen to stories. The reason why it sticks is because our brain experiences stories. Do you see what I'm saying? She says when you tell people facts, only that part of your brain that processes information is activated. But when you tell people a story, she said it actually triggers what they call the neurons. Neural coupling happens in you. And your neurons start to model every emotion and feeling that is in that story. And all of that gets activated. You start to feel the emotion. You start to picture yourself in that situation. You literally start to experience what it is that people are telling you. And that's why raw data does not have the same power, okay? A study at Stanford, they said if you said to an audience, over 800 million people suffer from hunger. He said that's powerful, but a personal story about one child struggling to find food is far more likely to make people donate. Isn't that crazy? Okay. So what stories do we tell? 60% of Inspire Women Scholarship recipients come from backgrounds of abuse. That's a data point. It's a fact. Let me tell you about Susan. Susan was sexually molested by her stepfather continuously in her home. She was afraid to tell her mother because her stepfather threatened to leave. At the age of 16, she couldn't stand it anymore. So she ran away from home and she lived under a bridge. While under a bridge, she was raped by a homeless man. Then one day she was passing a church and she heard the singing, and she said she felt like the love of God just washed over her. And then God was saying that she was washed as white as snow. And she says, and God has a calling on my life so that I can use my life to minister to the teens who may be in those same situations of domestic abuse. And Susan would say to me, could you tell the people you talk to that when you don't give to Inspire Women and they can't fund my tuition, then all I've got left are my painful memories. But when you support me, you actually have given me a bridge to go from my pain to God's purpose. Story. Okay? How many people want to give to Susan? Right? So, and it's true. You didn't just make up the story. But if I said to you, 60% of our scholarship recipients, interesting fact, okay? But it didn't engage all the parts of your brain. Is it any surprise that Jesus communicated with stories, right? Luke 15:3-7. Jesus told this parable, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. He taught with stories, right? He told 38 parables using everyday scenarios. Okay, now on the topic of stories, I think it's not just any story. Because sometimes you hear stories and that person is going in so many directions, you don't know what the point is. Have you ever been with someone who goes from one story to the next story, and you kind of go, where's this all leading, right? I took the team to a movie last week. We literally left the movie going, what was that about? Okay, we totally could not pinpoint. What was the message? You know, what was the point that that person was making? Arielle Fernald, she's the producer of the movie Bringing Back Christmas. She's also going to be the speaker at our conference, okay? And what she will challenge the audience with is that when she evaluates movie scripts and when she writes movie scripts, the biggest question she needs to ask is, what is the message? Okay? So I think that that's what she's going to help you do. And I hope all of you will either host a table to be there, or you will get together here and say, listen, let's just go together. It's a fabulous event. Okay? It's going to be at the Western Galleria. You've got a morning of inspiration, and then you break to have lunch with each other. There's a 3-course hot-plated lunch. And the whole thing is designed, this is our 25th conference. Okay, so we're making it ultra special for you guys. So I just pray that you will be there and enjoy it, because our staff is going through a lot of work to make this special. But her message will be on what is your message? What is the message of your, and she challenges me with that. Because as we're developing, or she's helping to develop the movie on my life, you know, it can go in so many directions. It's like, so, but what is the central theme of what we're trying to tell? And what is the takeaway message for people? Okay, when they go see the movie, what do you want them to leave with? Okay, when people look at your life, what is the takeaway message on your life? When life doesn't have a central theme, it's confusing. It's confusing to you, right? It's like, man, I don't know what my life is about. Well, if you don't know what your life is about, nobody around you knows what your life is about. Okay? I thought this was so amazing. One of the illustrations they gave on someone who could so succinctly communicate a message was Steve Jobs, who was the founder of Apple. And they said that when he announced the new Apple iPod in 2001, he did not talk about the design. He did not talk about the size of the screen. He didn't talk about the technical storage capacity of this gadget. Instead, he went on stage and in 5 words, he communicated the message. And he said, 1,000 songs in your pocket. And everybody got it. Okay? What is the message for your life that you could possibly say in 5 words that people will get? What is your life about? Okay? Continuing my research on how best to communicate, another article I read, it was an article in Teachers Institute. It's titled Engaging Students in Active Learning Through Effective Questions. And it says that the brain processes opinions different than how it processes questions. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so a study published by Neuropsychologia, they compared the brain activity, and they found more brain regions were engaged when participants were asked questions, okay? Recall that Jesus communicated through asking questions. Who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Matthew 12:48. He didn't say, you know, your family is bigger than those related to you by blood. He didn't say, hey, can you get out of your own small world and expand it because the world is bigger than just your little world. He said, who is my mother? who are my brothers? He got you to think before he would then communicate, whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. Okay? Another question, who do people say that I am? Matthew 16:13. Okay? He did not say, let me tell you who I am, right? He didn't go into a sermon, didn't go into a lecture. Who do you say that I am? Another question, what do you want me to do for you? Okay? How many of us go through life and we feel something's missing, but I don't know what it is? How many of you go through life and you feel like, man, I'm unhappy, but I don't know why? Now, Jesus could easily have said, oh, let me tell you why you're unhappy, right? Let me tell you what's missing in your life. Instead, what he said was, what do you want me to do for you? And he allows you to ask the questions so that you can discover. Okay? According to the London Institute for Contemporary Christianity, Jesus is recorded as asking 307 questions. Okay? 307 questions. And he answered 3 to 8 questions from the 183 questions that he was asked. See that? Okay? He himself asked 307 questions, and from the questions that he was asked, he only answered 3 to 8 of them. What does that tell you? Okay? That when you communicate with asking questions, that's when your brain actually gets clarity, right? So perhaps some of the questions you might ask in your life could be, where do you see our friendship in 5 years? Think about that, right? Whoever you are, where do you see this going in 5 years? What does it mean to finish well in your life? See how those questions can really get you to think and have some meaningful answers that could really shape the direction of your life. Okay, continuing my research. There's a book called Conversational Intelligence by Judith Glaser. And she said, we think of conversation as imparting information, right? That's what I quoted to my husband. It was from her book. She says, when actually there are 3 levels of conversation. The first level is transactional. This is how you fill out a bank loan, okay? It's all information. He said the second level of conversation is positional. You know, this is what I think about this issue. Okay, I'm giving you my opinion. And then she says the third level of conversation, which is the level that actually changes lives and changes behavior, is when she calls it co-creating. And co-creating is when I actually take the time to listen to what you think. And you take the time to listen to what I think. And we both then land on the page where it's the combined thinking of the both of us. She says that only happens at that third level of conversation, you know, and that third level cannot happen unless the first basic thing is unless there is trust. Because you see, if I don't trust you, I'm not going to tell you what I really think. Okay? It has to begin with trust. Okay? And then she says, because when you walk up to any person, their brain immediately starts to scan. So just imagine, the brain is scanning, and they're looking for cues that you don't even know what your brain is looking for. Okay? And then your brain will form a conclusion. And the brain will either say, this is this person I can trust, or this is a person I can't trust. And there are times then when you're around people, and I know you've had this, where you kind of go, I don't know what it is, right? I can't put my finger on it. But there's something about him. There's something about her, right? So you feel that there's something, well, that's because your brain has caught something that you don't even realize that the brain has scanned. And when the brain doesn't trust the person, you can't get to that level of trust when you can share openly and get to that point where whatever you're communicating can actually lead to changed behavior. She says most people communicate in this style. They tell it, they try to sell it, and then they yell it. Okay? Is that you? Okay, are you the tell, sell, yell person? Right? And she says, and what you're trying to do is to get them to a place where you are we-centric. Okay? You think as a we instead of I, you. We-centric. Okay? The thing that's so interesting is that she says once your brain pegs someone as an enemy, she said it then starts to go into overdrive. Okay? She says the amygdala is the one that is sending you the alarm. And then what your brain does, it goes back and it pulls every memory that is similar to what just happened, so that it's not just this one incident in front of you. You've now piled up every incident from the past, and then it fabricates this story. Okay? And then he says, you've got a movie going on in your head.
That's true.
Yeah. And the movie gets more and more scary. Right? And she said, and it's only because your brain detected something. Right? So then I thought, interesting, because in the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman, right? As soon as she met him, her brain immediately went, I'm a Samaritan, you're a Jew. Okay? What is it sending signals on? I don't know, I can trust you. I don't think this is safe, right? So she is going into overdrive of all her memories. So what did Jesus have to do? Notice that Jesus did not begin with, you have 5 husbands and the man you're with now is not your husband. He did not begin there. Because the trust hasn't been built yet. Okay? What did he ask for? He asked for a cup of water. Right? Did you know that when someone offers you a cup of coffee, that tells your brain, it warms up your brain? Okay? So I don't know if water works the same way. Right? He begins with that. He begins to talk to her about a possible future, right? He talks to her about, and living waters can flow from you. She starts to picture something different. She starts to see that maybe this is a safe person. And he lets that rapport begin because he's also doing something that the neuroscientist says needs to be done, and that is when your brain goes into active mode of conjuring up all this stuff, you've got to interrupt the pattern. And you've got to, what they call is sort of like the objective eye, where you have that person go, okay, wait a minute, what am I reacting to? Oh, maybe the person in front of me is okay. Maybe he's not like all the other Jews. Maybe he's not. And so when you start to invoke that objective eye, you now start responding differently. And I think what Jesus did was he allowed her to feel safe, to feel that he related to her, to feel like he really has something he wanted to offer her before he went into actually teaching her, right? And look at how Jesus does it in everything else he does. He heals the sick. He calms the storm. He does all that before he now goes into a teaching mode, right? You know the missionaries that are most successful out there? They drop stuff from the sky. They drop supplies. They drop food. They come with medicine. They come with, what is that all doing? It's building the trust, because unless you trust me, you're not going to want to listen to what I say, okay? There are other ways to build trust, which I also thought this was very interesting. There's a book called Cues by Vanessa Van Edwards. She specializes in science-based people skills. And so science-based people skills, okay, that's her specialty. So she wrote this book called Cues. And her whole premise is, it's not just your words, but it's your words that is accompanied by your body language, is accompanied by the tone of your voice, that will actually communicate the message, all right? So she talks about how cues, right? These cues can either support your message so that people will understand you, or you could really just sabotage yourself. And the example she gave, which I thought was so fascinating, because I watched that show, and it was the founder of Ring, right? Ring is everywhere now, right? You got the Ring doorbells, you got the Ring alarm, you got... The founder of Ring brought his concept to the Shark Tank, okay? The Shark Tank is that program where all these entrepreneurs get to evaluate your idea and they decide if they will invest in it, okay? And she said no one invested in him, okay? He presented this amazing idea, and she said, and I can tell you why, based on the science-based research. He said because the way his presentation went, he started with ding dong, okay, so the doorbell goes, all the shark says, who's there, right? Yeah. And his response was, Jamie? She said that was his first mistake. He did not say Jamie, which is a statement. He said Jamie with a question mark. Okay, she says the brain interprets that as a question inflection. And a question inflection tells the brain of the listener that this person is not confident. Isn't that crazy?
What was that again?
This person is not confident.
No,
so
question inflection.
It is called a question inflection.
A question
okay.
inflection.
So he did not say, it's Jamie. He said, Jamie?
Jamie? As if he was...
Like, you don't know you're Jamie? I mean, it's like, why did you do a question? I don't know why. I don't know why he did a question mark. Okay? In fact, it's a very interesting book because she said, now, I didn't go into it that deeply, you know, because I was looking for the biblical model. You know, I'm not trying to be a neuroscientist. But then she said, which I thought was intriguing, she said, I can meet with you, and within the first 5 minutes, she says, I can tell you which marriages are not going to work. Isn't that interesting? She says, I can tell you which business is going to go under. And then she said, and it's because of how people communicate. It's your body language, okay? She said something else. She says, when someone asks, okay, this is for our students, okay? When someone asks you about your calling, you need to know that there is something called the HALT, H-A-L-T, cue. The HALT cue is when someone communicates and then they have an out-of-place pause. You talk to people like that, where you kind of go, what? Yeah, they just say it, right? And they can't get it out. Well, the problem is the brain of the listener interprets it differently, okay? Because when people halt in the midst of conversation, she says it's either because of anxiety or it's because they're lying. And the problem is
or they have a memory problem.
Yeah. Yes. They have a memory problem. Yeah. And so they said, but the problem is your brain can't tell the difference. Okay? All the brain read is that there is some artificial halts in the middle of this, and then that person has lost credibility. I mean, that was something that someone taught me. They say when someone sits next to you and they ask you, what is your calling? You should know what it is. And if you don't, you need to spend time with God so you know what it is. Or if someone asks you, what do you need for your ministry? An answer should not be everything. Nobody gives to everything. Okay? It has to be, what is it that you need for your ministry? Okay? So I think it's like having that clarity is very, very important. She said that the research shows that warmth and competence account for 82% of our impression of people. Okay? Warmth and competence. She talked about the founder of Amazon. And she said, when you go visit him in his office, He takes you on a tour. He has the biggest smile. Come look at what I've built here. You know, he's so friendly. But when you sit down to talk to him, he sits down, he looks straight into your eyes, and he gives you solid answers. Okay? He's got warmth and he's got competence. And then she says, so when you're with somebody, you could have somebody on your team who is excellent at all the details. But if they don't have warmth, okay, there won't be trust. And then people will walk around making statements like, she's hard to read. Have you ever said that about somebody? She's hard to read, okay? She's hard to read because there's the warmth that's missing, okay? You've got to have both the warmth and the competence for people to then trust you. Because she said the warmth tells that brain of the receiver, can I trust you, okay? That has to be settled. The competence tells them, can I rely on you? And I need both. I need to trust you, but I also need to rely on you. Because you also know people who are amazingly friendly. Oh my God, but you can't trust them to finish anything, right? So you need both. You need warmth, and you also need competence. Okay? She talks about cues that are hidden cues that your brain will interpret. And she said, if you're going to post a photo on your LinkedIn account, you know, if you're trying to apply for a job, do not post a photo with your arms folded. People do that. It's like, this is a power pose, you think? She said the brain interprets it as you're defensive. You know, and you're not open, and there's something that you're hiding, right? She talks about when you're having a meeting and you're leaning forward, okay? You're sending the message that I care about what you're saying. Okay. Now you also have, I've been to meetings where the person I'm talking to leans back on their chair, right? They lean back on their chair, they put their foot on their desk. She said that body language is telling that person's brain that you're distancing yourself from me, okay? You're not actually interested in me. I just think it's very funny in the Bible. I don't think it's a correlation, but I just think it was humorous because I was looking in the Bible. Is there anybody in the Bible who leaned backwards on their chair? Okay, and guess what? There is. Okay, Eli fell backwards off his chair, and his neck was broken, and he died. Okay, don't lean back on your chair. Okay. Now, this is also interesting, okay? If you're in a meeting with your boss, if your boss is talking about whatever they're talking about, right? You've got to be careful that your body language does not indicate to your boss that you're someone they can trust, okay? And there's some things that, and she talked about, this is the weirdest thing. She said that if you're leaning away from your boss, okay, she talked about Leonardo da Vinci, who painted The Last Supper. She said, who was the one leaning away from Jesus? It was Judas. Okay? Body language shows whether you can be trusted. So if you're in a meeting with your boss, do not lean away from them, okay? Lean towards them. The other thing she says that maybe, she says the person doesn't even know why they don't trust you. It's something that you did that their brain picked up, okay? And one of the cues she said is, where are your toes pointing? Okay, so if you're in a meeting with me and your toes are pointing towards the door because you're actually wanting to leave, and if your boss's eyes catches a glimpse of that, his brain or her brain will immediately think, you're not supportive of me. All right, and you didn't even know you sent that cue. Yeah, and so she talked about Jesus in that Last Supper, and how Jesus sat. She said Jesus took up the most space in that painting, which means he's a person of prominence. He also had his palm up, okay? She says the palm up is openness, is vulnerability, right? So just be careful of how what you say and what your body does goes the same place. or else you literally are sabotaging yourself without realizing
Okay,
it.
well, what mine saying now?
I know.
I'll be relaxed.
Right, you are relaxed. You know what was so funny? One of her points was she actually, because I do this all the time, she says, do not give your audience a handout. Isn't that funny? She said, because when you give them a handout, it's like a podium, okay? She said, a podium creates distance, whereas if I came behind the podium and then I'm talking to you, you see, she said that actually connects you better with the people you're talking to. And then she says, when you give them a handout, they'll hold on to their handout. And the handout is a blocking between you and them.
Get that at church.
I know, we get that at church. It's just, I thought it was fascinating. Okay, I'm just going to give you a couple more things and then we'll wrap up, which I thought, this is not really to point on what we're talking about, but I found this so fascinating and I think you guys would love it. And that is, there's an article in psychologicalscience.org and it's called The New Science of Forgetting, okay? Because I'll hear people say that. They'll say, I'm forgetting because, oh, I must be getting old. And they'll think, oh, I'm forgetting because there's some breakdown in my memory system and that's why I don't remember. And they go, oh my God, I have her name. It's right at the tip of my tongue, but I don't know what her name is, right? Have you ever said that? Okay. So in the neuroscience, the new science of forgetting, they're saying there's nothing wrong with your memory system. They're saying that there are actual neurons in your brain whose job is to forget, all right? And he says, and the reason why your brain has to forget is because it is storing all this information, and the older you get, the more information is there, and your brain is trying to throw out stuff that you don't need.
That sounds good to me.
Okay? Isn't that funny? In fact, it says you will tend to forget things if your brain has figured out another system where you can retrieve that information. I tease Rebecca all the time. And I'll say, Rebecca, I don't remember because I know I can just ask you. Okay, so you're my retrieval system. My brain has figured out that you don't have to remember that because she will.
Yeah.
Okay, she says that if your brain knows that, oh, I can Google that, okay, it won't bother to store it. I think that's fascinating. All right, so then I thought, okay,
I have a question.
yeah.
How about like menopause, like hormonal changes, brain fog?
I don't know. I'm not a neuroscientist.
I like to think that
Yeah, but that's a great question.
I like to think that's real.
Yeah.
Because I do feel like there's like hormonal changes, like
Yeah.
especially because menopause.
Right.
Menopausal.
So I think maybe there are other contributing factors, but then the premise that something is breaking down in your memory system, they say is not actually true. There's nothing actually breaking down in your system. Like like I have a faulty system now. Like I used to remember that when I was a kid, but I don't anymore. And then they said that's actually not true. That's what they're finding out, okay? So then what I asked was, okay, if God has wired our brains in such a way, Oliver Hart, he's a professor at McGill University, he said without forgetting, nothing would work. You know, because you would be so cluttered with stuff that you don't know how to prioritize what you should remember. So then the question I asked was, does the Bible talk about forgetting? Okay, was there anything in the Bible that talks about things we should forget? And the one thing that I found was Paul. When Paul says, brothers, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining to what is ahead. Okay, Philippians 3:13-14. I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. Okay, now I thought, okay, this is actually really cool. Because if God has wired our brain in such a way where it's good to forget some things, what it tells me is what Paul has chosen to forget, so that he could focus on what it is that God has wanted him to build, right? Because I thought, did he remember those scenes where he killed those believers? Okay? Did he remember his blow up with Barnabas? Did he remember his friendship with Demas, who he then said, Demas, because he loved the world, has deserted me? Did he remember that incident when they threw rocks at his head and left him to die? And yet, I don't see any period of recovery for him. I don't see him traumatized. And I thought, isn't that interesting that maybe we could lean on that forgetting part and just ask the Lord to help us forget the things that actually have no eternal value, so that we can now use our brain power and focus on things that can actually build something that is eternal and for Him. Okay? Let me just summarize. People understand our true meaning when they connect with our emotions, not our information. Our brain responds to stories because it gravitates towards structure. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Those who tell the best stories will become the best leaders. Jesus taught with stories. The brain processes opinions and questions differently. More brain regions are engaged when participants are asked questions. Jesus asked 307 questions as his teaching style. Warmth and competence contribute to 82% of our impression of someone we meet. Jesus had both. Warmth questions, they answer for the listener, can I trust you? Competence answers the question, can I rely on you? Before someone will listen, they must first trust us. If someone triggers distrust, we have to use our objective eye to assess the situation instead of letting past memories skew our judgment. Our body language contributes to whether listeners believe what we say. Our brain is always scanning for enemy action. We are hardwired to ask the question, are you a friend or an enemy? The default mode of our brain is to forget. The Apostle Paul chose to forget details that serve no eternal purpose. Okay? I'm going to conclude with this. There were times when I was surprised when a donor gets offended. And sometimes donors get offended. They feel you've intruded in their time when you ask if they can help. Okay? And I found that what my brain does is it immediately sends signals, and it becomes red flags, and I recategorize them. They are no longer a safe friend. Okay, so they went from safe friend to unsafe friend. I want to flee. Ooh, never calling them again. Ooh, don't want to be around them again, because I don't want to be hurt, right? So your brain immediately does that. So I think that what I had to learn was, when you so immediately recategorize someone, you've actually canceled a relationship based on fear. When God wants you to build bridges to each other, and the only way that can happen is if you build trust, and if you would be vulnerable, and if you would share your heart. So I thought, well, I'll try to do that. So to this person who was, or expressed that they were offended, I said to her, you know what, maybe we come from a different context. So let me explain my context with you so maybe you can understand. And I wanted you to know how important you are to me. And I said, because you see, I grew up where I witnessed scenes. It was a war-torn country. People were getting into boats to sail into a vast ocean, hoping to land in a different, safe country. And I said, so my images growing up is when you get in the boat, you're so grateful for anyone in the boat with you. And I just said that when God called me to build Inspire Women, I felt like I was in a boat going into the middle of an ocean. And I said, and I am so grateful you're in the boat. If you can give, it helps me. because there are times when my arms get weary. But if you can't give, I want you to know I am so grateful you are in the boat. And the only reason I ask you is because I saw you as a safe friend where I could reach out and express my need. And she immediately said, I am so sorry. I overreacted. I want you to know I am a friend. Okay? But she would never have said that if I had not been vulnerable and told her. Okay? If I had just said, oh, it's so much easier to say, okay, she's unsafe, cross her off my list, I'll never call her again. You know, we would never have been able to build that relationship. And I wonder today in your life, how do you need to communicate so that you can build bridges back to different people, back to different communities? Because God has not called us to cancel each other out, right? God has called us to be a community. So that's it. That's my message for you. Yeah.